In 1528, at the age of 47, the king of Maillers died. Leaving behind no heir, he appointed his wife as the next ruler of Maillers. He did, however, have two brothers who had an equally strong claim to the throne. One of these brothers, Pierre XI, was on the throne of Lecino, a wealthy colonial power, which, although declining, had the power to rival that of Maillers. The other, Louis XVI, was a prisoner of the Krähenfurtines, given in an exchange of hostages after a recent war. Just 2 months after the death, Pierre XI declared war on the Maillerians, followed shortly after by the Krähenfurtines. Seeing the Krähenfurtine declaration of war, the Duchies of Felsenburg and Kreuzdorn declared war on them, allying themselves with the Maillerians. You see, the Duchies of Krähenfurt, Felsenburg, and Kreuzdorn had been struggling against each other for power pretty much ever since they existed, and while none of the duchies cared much for who would be the next monarch of Maillers, all the duchies knew that this could be their best opportunity to gain hegemony over the others. Pierre leads his army across the border with Maillers, into the mountainous region of Montagne. There, they are met by a Maillerian army stationed at the provincial capital of Arml. Arml was picked as the provincial capital for its great position in the Armel Valley. It would be impossible for an invading army to pass around its city walls. As such, it stationed the majority of the Maillerian army in the region, with the other major stronghold being Chalais in the north. The leader of the defending army, Nathan Beaumont, had positioned his forces behind the trenches in the most narrow portion of the valley. If Pierre chose to attack these defenses, he would most certainly lose. Oh my, that is certainly a problem. Isn't Maillers the most militarily advanced country in Europe, if not the world? How could this happen? You see, following the Second War of the Eisen in 1273, Maillers had put a puppet on the throne of Lecino, and because of this, they hadn't actually needed a particularly strong defense of their western border, and withdrew all of their most experienced and well-equipped troops to defend their eastern border, which was in an almost constant state of war. The Lecino victory at Armel both prompted the Kingdom of Verdun and the Duchy of Krähenfurt to join the war on the side of Pierre, and allowed Pierre control over all of western Maillers. After 3 years of fighting, Maillers was severely weakened. Many of their western cities had been captured by Pierre's army, and while they held back the Krähenfurtine army in the east, they were not in a good position to send reinforcements to the west. Finally, Pierre chose to attack the Maillerian capital of Manois itself. 3 years earlier, after the Battle of Armel, the Maillerians hastened their efforts to convert all their fortifications to bastion forts. This included the city of Manois. While the fortifications had not yet been finished, they were still formidable, and proved to be a challenge to siege. When Pierre arrived, he initially tried to use shock to his advantage, assaulting the city. This soon proved to be a really stupid idea, though. His troops were massacred in the crossfire and drowned in the moats. He was forced to settle in for a prolonged siege, setting up camp. The next day, the troops set to work building the circumvallation and contravallation. To try and prevent the Lecino troops from fortifying their position and sealing off the city, the garrison cavalry sallied forth and assaulted the dispersed troops, greatly delaying their building efforts. 5 months into the siege, both sides were tired, but slowly, Pierre had begun to make progress. After months of bombardment, sapping, and assault, Lecino troops had captured one of the ravelins, turning it into a forward cannon position, allowing them to more effectively fire at other fortifications. However, this progress would not last long, as reinforcements from the east had finally arrived to relieve the siege. The Maillerian reinforcements stationed themselves on a nearby hill overlooking the city. From there, they scouted out the wall, looking for gaps to sneak through. Eventually, they found a way to communicate with the city's defenders and organized an attack. As the day broke and the Licino troops were busy eating breakfast and preparing to assault the city once again, cannon fire began raining down on them. Soldiers rushed to defend the walls, but they were toppled by Maillerian cannon fire. Pierre realized it was too late and retreated to try and fight another day. While Pierre was marching his army through Maillers, in Sardinia, the Duchy of Krähenfurt had been fighting a war with Felsenburg and Kreuzdorn. They had actually been performing quite well, capturing several major border forts. Now, Ludeck was marching towards Felsenburg itself, but was caught in the Trautal Valley, just a few miles north of Felsenburg. Both sides lined up on opposing hills. They sat there for a while, neither side moving. It seemed like they were in a stalemate. Neither side wanted to give up their position on the hill. Ludeck didn't want to withdraw. Frederick and Hossinger couldn't. When the day ended, they both made camp. The next day, they lined up again. Frederick observed a weakness in the Krähenfurtian line and repositioned his forces. In response, Ludeck repositioned his forces as well. This continued for the rest of the day. They would do this dance of repositioning for the next 2 days, in fact. On the 5th day, both sides received news of the Maillerian victory at Manois. This news significantly improved morale in the Felsenburg and Kreuzdorn camps, and decreased morale in the Krähenfurtian camp. With this new information, Frederick knew it was time to strike. The next day, he received reports of strange troop movements in the Krähenfurtian camp. They were retreating. It was a foggy day, not ideal for battle, but he quickly scrambled his troops together. He couldn't lose this opportunity. The troops charged, morale high, certain they would win. When they arrived at the Krähenfurtian camp, there was barely any resistance. They chopped right through the first line, and then they stopped. Instead of troops on the verge of collapse, they found scarecrows, wooden poles meant to give the illusion of an army. What was the meaning of this? They looked around them in horror, realizing they had been trapped. With the capture of their entire army, Frederick and Jürgen were forced to the negotiating table. While they lost no land, they were forced to pay for the return of the prisoners, and were forced to accept Krähenfurtian expansion into the nearby regions of Hügel and Allenburg. In the end, although Maillers won the war, defeating Pierre decisively in the Battle of Pétalieux, the Duchy of Krähenfurt secured its hegemony over the other two duchies, at least for the next 6 years.